So what is the IELTS listening exam? Like all parts of the IELTS assessment, the exam designers do their best to make sure that the exam is as predictable as possible. When I say predictable, I don't mean that you can guess what the answers will be, but that the structure will be the same every single time somebody sits an exam. The questions will be different, but the format and structure will always stay the same. So what is this structure? Well, the IELTS listening is divided into 4 different parts. So there will be 4 audio tracks, and then with these audio tracks you will have 10 questions for each one. So part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4, and 10 questions for each. Many people feel that part 1 is the easiest and part 4 is the hardest. So this means that they get progressively harder as you go on. Some people find part 3 and part 4 easier, which we'll talk about in a moment, but most people find the beginning of the exam easier than the end of the exam. The audio will only play once. In some listening assessments, you're able to hear the audio twice, but not in the IELTS. So you must catch the answers the first time the audio plays. This requires a degree of preparation, but it is much more like real-life listening, and that is why the exam designers have the test structured in this way. The advice that I always like to give to people as they're beginning to prepare for their IELTS listening test is to think about the challenges in 2 different groups. On one side, we have the audio track and the challenges that come along with that. And on the other side, we have the questions and the challenges that come with that. If you can learn what the organization and structure of the audio track is going to be, it can make it much, much easier when it comes to answering the questions. As we'll see in a moment, certain question types occur more commonly at different stages in the audio. So learning about both aspects is the best way to begin your preparation for the IELTS listening. After that, it just becomes a matter of practice and work to make sure that you are as familiar as possible with both aspects. You know the exam well and you're not going to be surprised by anything. And then hopefully you'll be able to score at your maximum band level. So let's talk about the audio first. As we said at the beginning of the video, the audio is divided into 4 parts. And these parts will always follow the same pattern. The first audio track will always be a conversation. It will usually be between 2 people. It's possible there could be more, but it's almost always 2 people. And the conversation will be about an everyday life topic or an everyday life situation. So the common context we have in part 1 are somebody making a phone call to book something. Maybe they're trying to book a hotel room to stay in. Maybe they're trying to arrange a birthday party and they are trying to sort out the food or the venue or something like this. Sometimes it is a job interview or a volunteer who wants to help in a certain situation. So it's always going to be a conversation and it will always be about an everyday life topic. And this means that we have lots of situations where people are using the kind of language we use every day when we are making arrangements. We hear a lot of names. We hear a lot of telephone numbers. We hear a lot of addresses, email addresses too. Things like this are very, very common in part 1. Part 2 is also going to be about a kind of everyday life situation, but this time it is not a conversation. Instead, it will be a monologue. So a monologue is when one person is speaking on their own. But it'll still be about an everyday life situation. So examples of the kind of things we might hear, it's very common that they will be instructions or guidance for something. Perhaps it is guidance on what to do if there is a fire in the building that you are in. Perhaps the situation is the listener is on an imaginary tour of a place and the tour guide is telling them about the things that they are seeing, or the tour guide is giving them some safety instructions or something like this. Sometimes it could be an excerpt from a radio show. But the main thing to remember is it will be a monologue, one person speaking on their own, and it will be about an everyday life topic. Part 3 of the assessment will go back to being a conversation, just like part 1. But the difference is the topic will change. Instead of being about an everyday life situation, part 3 will be about a specialist subject area. So the most common thing we have in IELTS, the vast majority of the listening part 3s, are a group of university students discussing their subject. Perhaps they have a work placement to do, or perhaps they have a project, or perhaps they've just seen a lecture and they're talking about it. The point is that the vocabulary is going to be much more specialized than we saw in part 1 and part 2. So it's sometimes a little bit more complex and maybe more unfamiliar to people who are listening to it. But part 3 is very predictable. It will be a conversation. It's usually between a group of university students about a specialist subject area. The final part of the listening, part 4, will also be on a specialist topic area, but this time, just like part 2, it will be a monologue, one person speaking on their own. So usually this takes the form of perhaps a lecture, maybe a radio show, something like this. The important thing to remember is it will be one person talking on their own about a specialist topic. Before we look at the questions in detail, I want to just talk a little bit about why the exam follows this structure. As we said, we have 2 parts, part 1 and part 2, which will be about everyday life topics and situations. And we have 2 parts, which are going to look at specialist topics. So 1 and 2 is everyday life, 3 and 4 is specialist. Then on the other side, we have 1 and 3, which will be conversations, and 2 and 4, which will be monologues. Now there's a reason that the exam is structured this way. In the actual exam, there really isn't very much listening time. Okay, the exam lasts for about 25-30 minutes, something like this. But the actual listening audio is probably only about 20 minutes of that. So each section is probably only about 5 minutes long. It's very short. Most of the time is instructions, opportunities for you to correct your answers at the end, and things like this. So in that very short amount of listening time, the exam designers need to try and cover as much of the kind of listening that could occur in real life. And so this is why they follow this structure. We use language in different ways in all of these situations. So if we think about everyday life language, there's going to be a lot of probably informal language that we use. There's going to be lots of social greetings and things like this. There's going to be more of what we call idiomatic language. So that's not formal structural language, but the kind of language that makes up most of the informal use in everyday life. We're going to see a lot of that in this everyday life section. Whereas for the parts which are looking at specialist vocabulary, well, we're going to have more specialist vocabulary. There's going to be more words which IELTS candidates are less likely to know because we don't come across them in normal life or in our normal language lessons. The vocabulary may be a little bit more complex, a little bit more rare, as we've just said. But it's going to be much more formal, usually. Again, we'll talk about differences between conversations and monologues as well, but it's going to be a little bit more formal, perhaps, or a little bit more structured. So there's a big difference between the kind of language we use in everyday life and the kind of language we use to talk about a specialist subject. And then we have the difference between conversations and monologues. Now, in a conversation, a huge amount of the speech that we do is not really about the message that we are giving. What we're doing in a conversation is we are using language to send signals to the person that we are speaking with. Sending signals about when we have finished talking, sending signals to set the mood and things like this. So probably only about 30% of the words we use in a conversation are actually about the message we are trying to send. The rest are all parts of the interaction between two people. That's a very big topic. I don't want to talk about it too much in this video, but it's an important thing that we need to remember. So in the conversation sections, there's going to be lots of interaction between the people, which is not about the topic area. It's just about interaction between people. We're going to see probably shorter sentences. We're going to see lots of these sentences linking between the different people who are speaking. And we can contrast that with the kind of language we see in a monologue. In a monologue, we're going to see language which is much closer to the kind of language we see written down. There will be longer sentences, more complex sentence structures. Probably the vocabulary will be slightly longer and more complex too. But there's going to be a lot less of that interpersonal communication style language added in. So much more of the monologues will be about the main message. Much more of the conversations will be about interaction. So hopefully you can see that by dividing the exam paper up in this way, the IELTS designers are trying to cover as wide a spread of English use as they can in a very short amount of time. Now, how does this help you? But if you're preparing, the main point of understanding these differences is how it can impact the kind of questions that we are asked. Officially, there's quite a long list of different types of question that we can see in the IELTS listening assessment. But an easy way to think about it is to divide these into three main groups. The first group of question types are what we call gap fill questions. So these are all of the different types of questions where there is a word or a line and we need to decide what fits in that gap. The second type are multiple choice style questions. This is when we're given a list of answers and we need to choose which one is correct. And the final type is map labeling questions. This is where we're given a map and we need to decide what certain areas on the map relate to. Of course, this is a generalization. There are, as I say, a wide range, but I think it's easiest to think in terms of these three groups. So understanding these different types of question at the same time as understanding the flow of the exam and how the different sections work can give us a real advantage in preparing for the assessment. Different question types have different challenges at different stages in the exam. Over the course of the next few videos in this series, we'll be looking at how understanding the different question types and the different stages of the exam can help us to improve our exam performance. There are different challenges, different nasty tricks that the examiners will do in each of the parts that can catch us out in different ways at different stages of the assessment. So the things that are difficult in a gap fill task in part 1 are going to be very different from the things which are challenging about a gap fill task in part 4. Multiple choice questions have different challenges to gap fill questions. And again, the multiple choice challenges we see at the beginning of the exam compared to the end of the exam can sometimes be quite different. So we'll be taking a deep dive into each of these question types and looking at how we can predict the challenges and the difficulties that are going to come up, get over these challenges, get past these difficulties as effectively as possible. So until then, I wish you all the very best for your preparations for your IELTS assessments.